Thank you all for joining this webinar this lunchtime. My name is Katie Docherty and I'm the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, and I thank you for joining us today. Today we're launching a joint campaign with Rogare, the fundraising think tank, to raise awareness of the need to help fundraisers feel safe through a donor code of conduct. But before I introduce the panel and our agenda, I want to give a content warning for this session. Today we will be discussing sensitive topics, including sexual harassment and assault. And so I want to acknowledge that this can be a difficult and triggering subject. These experiences can affect people in different ways. So please feel free to step away, pause, or leave the webinar at any time, and please look after you. Today, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website, so you can come back and review it at another time. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Fundraisers should feel safe in their jobs, but sadly, research shows that they can and do face instances of inappropriate behaviour. Fundraisers are reporting bullying, harassment, and sexually inappropriate behaviour from donors. And one tool that could be used to rectify this is a donor code of conduct. Introducing our panel, we have with us Damien Chapman, Chair of Rogare and Trustee of the Chartered Institute of Fundraising. Damien's going to talk about why there is a need for a campaign and why we need a donor code of conduct. Antonia Brownlee is the Director of Philanthropy at Scottish Ballet, and she's going to talk about Scottish Ballet's donor guiding principles, which were put in place this year. We'll then come back to Damien, who's going to talk about the next steps in the campaign, and finally there will be a place for questions at the end. A few pieces of housekeeping. Please use the Q&A function if you want to ask questions of the panel, and please use the chat function if you have any technical problems, and one of my colleagues will respond to you directly there. And just a final reminder that this session is being recorded. So I'd now like to hand over to Damien. Damien, thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening and good morning if you're listening in from other parts of the world. My name's Damien Chapman, and I'm from the Rogare think tank. I'm the chair. If we can move the slides on, please, to the blue one. If anybody wants to talk or get in contact with me, the QR code pulls up my LinkedIn profile. There it is to help you. But what I want to do is just provide a bit of a background as to the work that Rogare did in this space and why. So we conducted a survey as part of the gender issues in fundraising, and one of the key parts, if you move on to the next slide, was to actually go through a number of the different areas relating to gender issues in fundraising. Next slide, please. And as part of that, we had just over 200 people who responded back to the survey, and half of whom said that experienced behaviour from a donor that made them feel physically or mentally unsafe. The whole idea behind this was to understand what is actually happening within fundraising right now, and also what people are experiencing. Because when fundraisers meet donors, some don't feel safe. And the reason they don't feel safe is because they've been subjected to sexually inappropriate behaviour by a donor. And 84% of people identified that they had experienced sexually inappropriate behaviour as part of feeling unsafe, and 82% actually experienced it more than once. The simple fact is that there's a power differential in the relationship between fundraisers and donors, and fundraisers want something from donors, something that is within donors' power to grant or refuse. Therefore, fundraisers have more power, and in any situation where one party to a relationship holds more power, there's a temptation to exploit for personal gain. Next slide, please. One of the things that we looked at as part of the program and as part of the work was to talk about the donor code of conduct. And that's because even though inappropriate behavior is perpetrated probably only by a small minority of donors, studies have revealed that an unacceptably high number of fundraisers have felt the effects. And so one of the key recommendations about dismantling patriarchal structures in fundraising was a donor code of conduct to help keep fundraisers safe from inappropriate behavior. Interestingly, there are codes of conduct that apply to other areas of operational work, but there wasn't one around the power imbalance related to donors. And so what Rogare has done is created a blueprint, and it is a blueprint for people that is charter style to set out expected standards of donor behavior. If we can move to the next slide, please. And essentially, it boils down to being a commitment that states that donors will, as the slide says, treat staff as knowledgeable professionals, accord them the respect that they deserve, don't discriminate or harass fundraisers, recognize their potential power in the relationship and not exploit it, and also not put conditions on donations for personal benefit. Now, the QR code will link you to the gender issues section of the Rogare website that's got all the information on it. It's got the research that went into gender issues in fundraising. It's also got blueprint on there. It's also got how you can start looking at the structural change that's needed to support such a code of conduct. But what we're going to do is discuss this about how you can use it, and then hand over to Scottish Ballet and Antonia, who's going to talk about how they've actually done it. So if we can move to the next slide. The advice that we give from Rogare is to, you can either adopt it literally as is, copy and paste it and put it straight onto your website, and then start talking about it with your donors, but more importantly, you need to talk about it with your fundraisers. What we suggest, though, is that you actually use it as a template to adapt and even create your own. But the one thing that we do suggest that you do is to start the conversations within your organization. I recognize that there's not going to be everybody on this call who has the immediate ability, authority, autonomy, and responsibility to go, right, we're going to do this right now. We're going to do it absolutely in the organization. We're going to start it tomorrow. What you can do is start the conversation by saying that we have an issue with the imbalance of power that exists between fundraiser and donor, and we want to have a better framework to be able to safeguard and protect the fundraisers. The things that we'd like to talk about is this donor code of conduct. This is what's happening in other organizations. So what I will suggest that we do, because I think we've still got some challenges with Antonia's sound, is I'm just going to go through some of the more historical elements relating to the blueprint itself and how we got there. The Gender Issues in Fundraising program has been a series of work that Rogare has done as one of its pillars of work for about 4 or 5 years now. And the whole idea around it was about genuinely understanding the issues, what gaps there are, why they exist, and how they manifest, but also what comes alongside the career path of a fundraiser, and particularly a career path of a female fundraiser. And this was work done by different experts and different players within the Rogare network, and they're all connected to fundraising one way or the other. And the Gender Issues Project Group that was set up by Sarah Tite as the project coordinator has been running through with about 16 different people taking part at different phases throughout. The associate members of Rogare fund this kind of work and allow the think tank to be able to bring these kind of issues to the fore, mostly because as a think tank, we get to say things that organizations sometimes to articulate or don't necessarily want to confront. The reality is more fundraisers have experienced the issues associated with patriarchal fundraising structures than ever before. And one of the ways that was manifested is through this power imbalance. So the whole idea behind the work was to get the organizations that employ fundraisers to start acknowledging this and to start recognizing this, but also the clear comment that came back was, we want ways to be able to start this conversation. It's a very difficult conversation to start with a blank sheet of paper. What can we do? And so the idea around the donor code of conduct was to raise awareness of the issues, stimulate discussion, raise awareness among the majority of donors that the behavior of a minority of their peers is unacceptable, and to act as a template of inspiration for others to move forward. Antonia, I think, has now come on to audio and sound, albeit by phone by the looks of it. So thank you so much for sticking with us, Antonia, and for digging deep and finding a way to get forward. So at this point, I'll hand over to you if that's all right. Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I am so sorry. I've missed the first 10 minutes of what you were saying, Damien, so I'm really sorry about that. But yeah, I'm now online on my phone. My laptop is not playing ball. But I'm really delighted to be here today to chat to you a little bit about the Scottish Valley donor guiding principles that we set up. I'll take you back to 2023 when Scottish Valley and our philanthropy team joined an online seminar with Rogare and the Institute of Fundraising about the donor guiding principles document that I saw that you were sharing earlier in your presentation, Damien. And we felt that the time was right to start moving forward with this ourselves as fundraisers. I think having been to that presentation, it made us realise that we were not alone, that we too had experienced everything that was being outlined in the guiding principles document. And we felt it was time to do something ourselves to really draw light to this issue that we were all facing. And I think it opened up a dialogue amongst our team about the sorts of issues that we had all faced. And I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that we too had experienced inappropriate sexual touches. We'd experienced comments that were unwelcome. We'd had people asking for places on boards in return for donations. But on top of that, we realised that our dancers at Scottish Valley were also being subjected to inappropriate comments and touch at events such as galas and in theatres. So as a team, we started throwing around ideas of what our donor guiding principles document could look like. And I think what we got to from the very beginning was that we didn't feel we could be as prescriptive as the Rogare Code of Conduct was. We felt at Scottish Valley that what was most important to us was our values of inclusion and excellence and innovation. So we felt that that was the right road to go down in terms of our own donor code of conduct, or guiding principles, as we called it. It took us a lot longer than we ever thought it would. I think because we wanted to make sure that we got it right. And the conversations I was having at leadership was very much about how this was our one opportunity to make sure that as a national performing arts company in Scotland, that we came forward with an approach that fitted us well and aligned with our values, and that we were making sure that while we were drawing attention to the fact that conduct like this did happen, that we weren't going to be alienating the majority of our donors who don't behave in this manner. So we did spend a good 2 years deciphering how we wanted to go about this, and that involved having conversations with our leadership team. It involved me having conversations with our executive director. It involved conversations with our artistic director and our chief executive. And then, as with all things to do with Scottish Valley, anything like this would be brought to our board. So it was brought to our board, I think it must have been earlier this year. But what was really important in this mission of ours was to make sure that we also involved the dancers, and we also involved any of our teams that were actively involved with donors and or partners. So the dancers also fed in around inappropriate conduct, which was the line that we came up with and used in our guiding principles document. The board then got involved because they felt that it was important that everybody was on board with it. They had been very surprised when I'd gone to them and explained the situations that some of us had experienced over the, the last however many years, and they were very keen to support us. So I worked closely with our board members that had been head of people and well-being, or HR in some cases. And between us, we came up with a document which we felt aligned with our values, particularly inclusion, but also was values-led and wouldn't offend people. So we got to our place, we had our guiding principles document, and it was written in a really positive manner, where it would say things like, you'll be really happy to know that you're joining a company and supporting a company who are led by values, which we believe that you too will lead your lives by, and things like, we will have a zero tolerance approach to racism, for example. We will have our board, all donors at Scottish Valley, they too live our values of inclusion, excellence and innovation. So that's how we came at it. We felt that was the most appropriate way for us to do it. And since we launched it back in April, and when I say launched it, what we started to do was we included it with all letters that were going out to patrons. So they might be new patrons or existing patrons that were renewing. And we included it as a document that they had to review and then sign and acknowledge that they'd read it. And we put it on our website. You'll see it on Scottish Valley's pages under Support Us. And we also put it on our endowment fund pages as well, under our values. And I'm really pleased to say that not a single person, patron or prospect, has come forward to say that they have an issue with it. And I think the most important thing in all of this is that what it's allowed us to do, having this document, has allowed us to really focus on values-led conversations at the very beginning with suspects and with prospects. And that has helped us ensure that people we're bringing into the fold of Scottish Valley align with our values and are happy to live those values while they're in our spaces, whether that's in a theatre or whether that here at our base in Tramway in Glasgow. And so far, touch wood, everything has gone very smoothly with it, and we have no regrets. We're pleased that we took as long as we took. It felt important to us to get it right, because I feel like you've only got one shot at this. And yeah, I'm so sorry. This has been a really tricky presentation to do or to talk with you about, because I didn't hear what was discussed before. But yeah, if anybody has got any questions, I'd be really delighted to answer them, or you can find me on LinkedIn and I'm happy to connect and have conversations as well about it.
Thank you, Antonia. What I thought I'd do is just probe a couple of those bits, if that's all right, because the introduction was just about the premise behind where it had come from and why, and the origins and the research. Having gone through this process, and you said it took a couple of years, it involved conversations across the whole ballet and the whole company. What would your advice be to somebody if they were thinking about setting this up or starting this conversation? What was the first thing that got you going?
I mean, it was obviously attending the Rogare online conversation where they talked about the donor kind of the donor code of conduct, and that was our first port of call, where I think it gave us the confidence to feel that we too should investigate this and consider it further. That was massively important to us. We didn't even realise that was an option. We certainly hadn't heard about anything similar in the UK. So that was a great start for us. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that you do it in a way that makes you feel that it's in line with your values as organisations, and that you as a company, but importantly that your board are behind you, that they support you, and that they, you know, if the buck was to stop with them, which in most cases it does with the governance of the board of directors, that they would be happy to stand by any code of conduct or guiding principles, whatever you decide to call it, that they are behind you and they will support you. So for me, that was vital to have their support.
That's interesting. And it's also interesting, the comment that you made about when it went live, there wasn't a single
Yeah.
challenge to it by donors.
No.
My experience is the same.
Right.
And actually, I've heard donors say to me, I'm glad to see this.
Yeah.
Because I come from a world of high value fundraising. It's where I've operated in for most of my fundraising career. And there is an appreciation, there is an experience by other high value donors about things going on or things that they've heard or seen. So actually, it provides them reassurance that the organization they're donating to and supporting has the right values at its origins, and that it's taking this seriously. I wonder if you can explore a bit more about how you prepared for that conversation with your existing donors and supporters. Did you warm that up, or did you prepare it, or did you just go, this is who we are, this is what we believe?
That's an interesting question, actually, because I think I forgot in my my gambling start to this presentation. I think I forgot to mention that our exec director felt it was quite important that we share our plans with some of our closest donors to see what their take on it would be. And I did do that. I shared it with our former chair, who was also a very generous donor to the company. And his initial thought was, I think, probably around the lines of, this is all great. Well, not what was happening. That wasn't great. But he said he had no issue with the document itself, but what he was concerned about was whether we would offend existing donors.
Mm-hmm.
But that, it prompted a conversation, I think, that we then had to have internally about what we would do if that happened. We were of the firm belief that if you've done nothing wrong and you've behaved in an exemplary manner whenever you've been around fundraisers, then you really have nothing to worry about. If, however, you have been that person that's maybe overstepped the mark, made a comment about an outfit somebody's wearing, made a sexualized comment towards a fundraiser or a dancer, then maybe it does allow you to reflect a little bit about the behaviour that you've perhaps adopted but never really given much thought to in those spaces. So that was the conversation that elicited with existing donors when we shared a draft with them. But actually, since then, the document then took on a much greater, I suppose, a greater movement towards values-led conversation rather than prescriptive-led donor code of conduct. So it then allowed us to change it a little bit. And I think that's what we wanted to make sure, that people didn't feel that we were alienating them or accusing them of anything, but we wanted to make people realise that it is something that fundraisers experience and shouldn't be experiencing.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. There's a question that's been posed by some in the audience about getting senior leadership on board, particularly around the objection that it isn't much of a problem coming from board members. It is just a small minority who are affected. And the research bears that out. It is a minority of donors that this is aimed at.
Yeah.
So why do you think organizations should care about this if it's just a small issue?
I think organisations should care about it because I think it shows that they value fundraisers as professionals. I mean, you don't expect to go to work and be sexually harassed, no matter where you work. And it's the same for fundraisers. But I think what happens is the line can be blurred with the job that we do, which involves entertaining. Well, certainly in our line of work within the performing arts, there's a huge amount of entertaining at theatres, at performances here are based in Tramway in Glasgow. And there's often alcohol involved. And whilst I'm not excusing that, it definitely fuels behaviours that you might not see in a normal place of work, where you're doing a kind of 9-to-5 job and everybody's, having a cup of tea or a glass of water. So I think it opened our board members' minds to something that the majority of them hadn't really considered. And when I say the majority, I mean, without singling people out, I think the women on the board were not particularly surprised to hear it. They were disappointed. They weren't particularly surprised.
Yeah.
But most of the men on the board were really concerned that was something that our team of completely female fundraisers were experiencing, thankfully from a minority, but it was important to them. It's very important to Scottish Valley that the well-being of staff is taken seriously. And particularly, I think as well, when you're working with dancers who are, often wearing leotards, tights, bare legs, and they're in environments where they feel perhaps exposed. And it's important that the person that they are on stage, the character that they are enacting on stage, is not perhaps that character or person in a room full of donors. So it was important for us to make sure that everybody, including dancers and the fundraisers, felt protected at work.
It's interesting, actually. I have posed this question back to a board member who had enough authority and sway over their board. When they asked a similar question, I said, well, how much sexual assault against your staff is acceptable?
Yeah.
And the answer came back, well, none.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
even if it's a minority of donors that this is impacting, you've said that there is no minimum level of acceptability on this. So this actually helps you reinforce that. One of the questions that's come through in a couple of these is about what happens if a donor does go over that line. Does the organization have those processes in place? Does it have the systems in place? Does it have, excuse the phrase, but the depth and confidence of execution and follow through when that donor dominance still exists?
Yeah, so that's another very good question, because we don't have it a policy per se, but what we have encouraged our fundraisers to do, and in turn what we would do, and I'm very pleased to see we've never had to have this conversation. What we would do is, in the first port of call, say, for example, it happened to a member of my team at the theatre, the member of the team would come and let me know what had happened. And then my approach to that would be to ask the donor if I could give them a call. I wouldn't be, squaring up to them in that event, in that space. What we would do is we would ask if I could give them a call. The following week, there was a couple of things I wanted to have a chat with them about, and I would raise it on a phone call. And I think what we do at Scottish Valley, and we do that with everything, whether it's a racist comment that's made, whether it's a ableist comment that's made, we would lead with curiosity. So rather than accusing somebody of X, Y, Z, I would be leading with curiosity and say something along the lines of, one of the members of my team let me know that the way that you approached them or touched them on Friday night made them feel uncomfortable. Whilst I'm sure that was not your intention, I really would just like to chat this through with you. And so I would do that away from that group, where there's no alcohol involved. It would be a conversation that would happen the week of or the week after, and it would be led with curiosity in the first instance. Our hope is, and as I say, we haven't ever had to do it, so I can't comment to that, but our hope is that the person in question would be sufficiently surprised or not that that was how it was taken, and that they would reflect on that experience. So that's what we've got in place so far.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, actually. There's a question that's come about, how does it go through into other forms of fundraising, not just high value?
Yeah.
I think that comes from actually having a code of conduct that's actually, it's not limited to the size of donation. The reality is that the donor dominance exists, whether it's a £1 donation or £1 million donation. It is still about that, the fundraiser seeking and soliciting donations involves creating that power imbalance. Absolutely. What I've seen is about how it can be applied in other areas. Face-to-face is actually a fascinating example of that, because it involves that element of unstructured and unprepared with a potential donor. Yeah. Particularly in street-based face-to-face fundraising. So I've seen it in all sorts of different circumstances. What I would encourage organizations to do is to think about, when they're building this and having this conversation, a bit like you did, Antonia, talk to everybody about this. You approach this from a position of, yes, we're looking at a donor dominance piece and a code of conduct for donors, but actually the donors interact with and intersect with the whole company. So we want to make sure that this is something that can apply across the board. I think the same could be said for whole fundraising functions and going, how does this need to work for events and community? There's somebody in the chat I saw going, this was, it's been persistent within community and events 20 years ago. I don't think there's any fundraiser who's been fundraising for over 20 years who would not have recognized some of this in all types of fundraising. So developing these codes and putting them in place involves thinking whole fundraising lens. But I think also coming back to the so what question, and how the organization prepares for that, to your comments and words. There's a final one that I just want to go into, and that's the conversation about how we make these things become more embedded. And I think it's probably a conversation that's involved Katie a little bit as well, because ultimately, Rogare is a fundraising think tank. Its job is to provoke conversation, provoke discussion, and highlight issues within the profession of fundraising that matter. The Institute has a role to play as the membership body for professional fundraisers, but ultimately fundraising is undertaken by organisations such as Scottish Ballet. And so the relationship and interplay between a think tank, the membership body for the profession, and also the employers has a role to play. What do you think that employers and charities should be thinking about more? What do you, Antonia, what do you think the membership body, Katie, and the Chartered Institute should be thinking about more? And what do you think we as the fundraising think tank at Rogare should be thinking about how we can maximise discussion and action on this?
Okay, so today is the big, the beginning of a campaign to raise awareness about this, and to raise awareness within the fundraising community, but also the wider charity sector, for charities and employers to begin the conversation about how they could develop a donor code of conduct for their organisation. And so we as the membership body are fully behind this campaign, and will be taking every opportunity that we can to continue this conversation. We'll also work directly with employers to help and support them in the development of this campaign. It might be worth popping on to the next slide at this point, actually, because this will give people a QR code to link to a set of resources that we've developed and placed on our website. And here you'll be able to get access to all the information that you want to start having these conversations in your organizations too, because we need everybody to be speaking about this. So you'll be able to access information about why we need the donor code of conduct, the suggested code that Rogare have developed, but people can use for a template and either just use or develop for their own organisation. There's FAQs for these kind of hard conversations that will come up in the conversations that you will be having inside your organisation, and also some case studies, including Antonia and Scottish Ballet's excellent example. So these resources are there for you to have the conversations within your organisation. We're going to be calling on charities to sign a pledge to commit to implementing this code. So that's the approach that we are taking. Antonia, how does it feel from your perspective?
I think it's a really good start. I think it's important that the conversation is being had, and I think for too long fundraisers have just put up with it. It's almost like it's sort of part of the job, and it just shouldn't be. We all have a right to go to work and feel respected and safe, and if you don't feel that way, then there's definitely something that needs to be done about it. Somebody has to be first to start addressing this in the public domain. I just don't think it's something we should be shying away from.
Definitely not. And this is something that is being taken seriously by regulators as well, because the new Code of Fundraising Practice that went live on the 1st of November this year, and that every fundraising organisation is subject to, actually has a section in it. It's a new obligation around charities protecting fundraisers from harm and harassment. So we're now in a situation where the principles-based code of practice requires organisations to consciously think about these things. This whole program and donor code of conduct piece is just one element that could be part of that toolkit that an organisation is using to safeguard and protect fundraisers from harm and harassment. What I would also say is that as organisations start to become more aware of this, there's nothing that stops organisations going further if they choose. The reality is organisations are employers. There is a legal duty on them. How much discretionary effort, how much welfare is involved in that is down to the employer. And that ultimately gives fundraisers abilities to be able to make decisions for themselves. What I would suggest that organizations that want to be good, want to be in this space, and want to be able to demonstrate to not just to their donors and to their beneficiaries, but also to their fundraisers and their employees, that they do have the right interests and the right values at heart. These are the kind of things that start to really bring that into sharper focus. And from the think tank's perspective, we will be doing what we can to highlight this more and more. And actually, one of the things that I'm going to be doing as chair is monitoring how many organizations are actually having these conversations around donor codes of conduct, and also how many are actually not just intimating an idea, but are actually following through. Antonia's shown what happens when organizations implement this and how positive an impact it can have actually on the organization, its workforce, and also on its donors. This does introduce a higher level of trust with donors. It's not just about trying to mitigate bad practice and bad behavior by some. So there'll be more that comes out on this. If there's anything that we at Rogare can do to help, contact me. Contact Ian, contact the think tank. And if you're struggling to have these kind of conversations, reach out. You've got Katie in the CIOF's team. You've got Antonia, who's very generously offered to talk people through and provide more assistance through LinkedIn. I, as chair of Rogare, will always be happy to talk about some of the work that we've been doing. But if anybody wants to get involved in some of the work that Rogare is doing, you're more than welcome to drop me a message. The details about how to join the campaign are on the QR code that's on the screen. Katie's highlighted that. Thank you so much from my perspective as Rogare. I'm going to hand back to Katie to close out the session, but thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you, Damien. And just before I close up the session, I just want to catch that last question that's come in about advocacy. And yes, so I'm having conversations with the other organisations in the civil society group, NCVO, Akivo, etc., and asking them to help us and join with us in persuading organisations to adopt this. And also, as well as government, speaking to Charity Commission and Oscar, because the more we can bring people into this campaign, the more likely we are to have success with it. So thanks for raising that. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Damien and all colleagues at Rogare for all the work that they've done to bring us to this place, and for their continued championing of this issue. And to Antonia, thank you for battling with those technical difficulties at the beginning, because this session has been so much richer for you sharing your experiences at Scottish Ballet, and I'm so glad we were able to hear that today. And thank you to all of the people who joined this webinar, giving up your lunch hour, because we all know, all of us, we know how important this issue is. We've been talking about it for years, so let's make something happen now, and let's really shift the dial on this and make sure that fundraising is truly a safe profession for every single one of us. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.